Usually with this part I start by putting the lock lever and release lever in place. I'm just wiping some molybdenum paste through the two holes top and bottom of the casting, through that where the guide post for the lock lever goes, and at the front edge here where the spring for the release lever will run against it. And we'll start with the lock lever. Slide that in at the base of the camera. That's the release lever. The lock lever, holding that with my finger from below, I can put its spring in place. There are two springs that look much the same. This is the lighter of the two springs. It goes over there. If I hold that down with my thumb, I can put the little circlip in place that holds everything together. Just get that on the slot and just press it forward with the tip of my tweezers. There's my lock lever in place. Moves nice and freely. The release lever, well, we've got to put its spring on the base of this. And we're reasonably fortunate this one hasn't been distorted. It's never fun when you've got to straighten them up because it's awkward to know how far to straighten them. Right, so I'm going to pop this through the casting. At the top, you've got to guide it up through there with the tip of your tweezers. Be careful not to get this spring trapped down against the body edge or anything like that. So I'm holding that lever now from below. We'll put its return spring on at the top. Now the return spring is the heavier of the two springs, and it's held in place with this screw, and that screw's going into a split shaft, so it's not always easy to get it to start in the thread. And I think that's started. Run that down. Now it's got to go down far enough that this shutter release shaft, when that's at the top of its stroke, will clear it. So a little bit more than that. That looks fine, and I'm going to give that a half a turn more for good measure. Okay, so that's our levers in place in the body. And I can put the film advance shaft in next. Of course I've got to lubricate this first, and normally I use graphite grease to do that job. Okay, graphite grease. What I'm needing to do here is get the grease down between this bush and the shaft. And this stuff is suitably tacky, tends to stay where it's put. Checking that's worked in nicely, and run some into the spring as well, so that the coils of the spring will wind over each other nice and smoothly. Now the cam lobes here, I'm just putting or ratchet lobes, I'm just putting some synthetic grease on there. Check that's sitting, that the holes are lined up right through here, so I've got access to my screw holes. Now take my take up spool, put the bush in at the round end, drop that into the film, to the take up spool end, and put the shaft in place. I'll just swing the lock lever up out of the way, pull the release lever out of the way, and that should drop in to place. Yep, so it's lined up there. That's all sitting in the neutral position. In other words, I've got no tension on that film advance. and I'll get the 3 fixing screws in place. The fixing screws are the same size as the fixing screws that hold the chrome plate on the bottom of the camera, except that these ones will be nice and clean because they haven't got glue on them or corrosion from when the camera was put down on a damp surface. But the others would work just as well. Right, so the 3 screws are in place, I can tighten those up. That's the film advance shaft in there. I need to put the piece in at the top here now, the clutch assembly. Now normally at this stage I just pop this underneath the film advance so that the shaft can't get pushed down while I'm working. So the clutch assembly, let's slide this to one side. Here's the clutch assembly. And the clutch assembly, I'm going to lubricate this with graphite grease. So I'll just run some inside the outer portion, the drum if you like. Put the spring on the inner portion. The tab has to line up with the notch in it obviously. I'm just going to lower a pair of crimp lug pliers over the top of that to hold that in position, rotate that to hold it all tight. Stick this on over the top, slide it on like that. That's the clutch assembly. That's all good. I'll put a wipe of synthetic grease through the centre, drop that in place here and rotate it till it engages the notches on the top of the take-up spool. Here's the bush for the film advance. The gears on the top of this, these 2 little pinions, they're linked together on a shaft. Put a blob of grease on there, squeeze it in, and hydraulic pressure will drive that in. Give it a wipe on the inside, through the centre where it's going to go over the shaft, and put that in position. Open the back of the camera, rotate the take-up spool with my thumb. It'll engage the gear on the drum with this gear set here, these pinions, and line everything up. 2 screws. The shoulder screw here, and at the front we need this spacer, plain side up, not countersunk side up, a little ratchet pull, and the shoulder screw that runs through them. I'll put a touch of grease on the top of this where that pull's going to rotate. And see if I can get that screwed into the top here. Make sure that that pull is free to rotate. That looks good. Tighten those 2 screws up and fit the spring for the pull in position. This acts to push the pull towards the centre. In other words, to keep it engaged with the gear that goes on there. Okay, so much for that part. Next, the gear. So here's the gear. I'm going to put a wipe of grease around the inside edge of that. Synthetic grease. And through the centre for good measure. Put that on there. If I rotate that anti-clockwise, it should push the pull out of the way and engage, just like that. This spring I'm putting in place, I've given that a wipe of synthetic grease. mostly to prevent any corrosion problems in the future more than anything else. That goes cup shaped up, in other words the arms are upwards. This piece goes on top. This piece goes on there. Get that over the end of the shaft. It's not pressing down very far. Let's have a look at this film advance. So that's caught underneath. Okay, let's press that back up. That's better. That washer goes on there. And the gear. Make sure that's on the square of the shaft. And its fixing screw. Run that down. Being careful not to disturb the position of the gear on that shaft. Okay, that's good. I can tighten that up because the lock lever is holding the shaft from rotating. That's that piece out of the way. Right, now I think we'll have the catch, the rewind button. Usually wipe the curved end of that with some molybdenum paste, and since I've got it in my hand, just run it through the centre. Slide that into place under here. Position its return spring. That's held in place with a shoulder screw. The spring revolves around one shoulder on that screw, the lever around another. Check that that all moves freely, in other words that nothing's trapped under the shoulder. Tighten that up and hook the spring into place, which involves lifting this loose end up and hooking it behind there. So this is spring loaded. Next I want the sprocket shaft in place. Open the back of the camera, sprocket shaft here, slot side up. Put that into position here. Take the sprocket shaft, wipe some synthetic grease on the shaft towards the top and towards the bottom. That's where it runs through the body casting. Slide that down through the sprocket, holding my finger on it from below. And pull the lock lever, the button catch out of the way, rewind button catch out of the way. Let it slide past there, still maintaining some pressure with my finger. I'll rotate the take up spool slightly, that'll just engage those two gears. And there's that shaft sitting up in the position ready to have the rewind button put in place. So, rewind button next. Put some synthetic grease through the spring. Put the rewind button over the spring, into the spring, and put its washer in place, holding my finger on the top of the sprocket shaft. Screw this in. Check that it's free, check that the button will pass through the washer, isn't trapped against the washer, and tighten that up. Oh, we're not tightening anything up, I can put a screw in place yet. Let's do that. So, the screw that drives the sprocket from the sprocket shaft drops into the slot. And I should have put that in first, we got away with that. Put that in there. See if I can get it to start. Yep, it's going to go. Right. Now I'm holding the sprocket with my thumb. I'll get my pliers and tighten that rewind button up. That's it. So now you can see the sprocket shaft revolving as I revolve the take-up spool. That's all looking good. At the top of the camera, what do we want now? Oh, where's our chrome trim? Here it is. I'll hold that in place with the strap lug. Now the holes in that strap are slotted. I found from experience if you push the strap lug as far towards the end of the body as it'll go and tighten the screw heads up, that's the right position for it. Okay, well that's it for the top of the camera for the moment. I need to wind some tension onto my film advance. Let's just make sure that shutter release isn't going to disappear on me. Okay, so what do I want to achieve here? Well, I'll press this up and swing my lock lever out of the way. See if I can get this sitting on something. What I've got to do is hold the release lever out of the way, rotate this one full turn, drop the release lever and the lock lever back in place, and that'll hold it in position with tension on it. Let me see if I can prop this up on something. That'll do. Give me 2 pair of tweezers. Where'd the other pair go? Sure, I had 2 here a minute ago, and that wasn't the ones I wanted either. Neither were they, but I think they'll do. Okay. So, let's hold that lever back. Rotate this one full turn, drop that back in place, drop the lock lever in to hold it. The tension is now on the film advance. And put the chrome trim plate on the base of the camera. Now I've got to be careful not to hit the release lever or the lock lever, otherwise they'll release that film advance and I'll have to take this apart and tension it again. So I'll get these screws in the chrome trim at the base here. Remembering that in this case we had one short screw sitting in this position. The reason they use a short screw there is so to provide a bit of extra clearance between it and the shroud here. In practice I'm not sure it was necessary and they stopped doing it. Okay, I'll get those 3 screws in place and fit my film advance lever. I'm still being careful not to put the camera down on the bench or hit the release lever or the lock lever. I get my screws in here. Now we are in no danger that we can't lose the film advance tension now. So let's check that that works. So if I press my finger on the release lever, hold down the lock lever, swing that, it swings through an arc, returns nicely. That's moving smoothly. I'll get my other screws in this chrome trim. I'm still got this camera hovering in the air because I don't dare hit anything. If I hit this down on the bench I could depress the push the rewind shaft all the way in, which might release my rubber band and allow the shutter release shaft to fall out, which potentially could be a big nuisance. And here's that little short screw. Looking at the state of that, it looks like it's brass actually. It is. All the others are steel, this one's brass. Okay, that bit's out of the way. Film advance is in. Works nice and smoothly. I think we could put the cocking rack in next. Okay, so the cocking rack, I'm going to apply some synthetic grease to the lower section, some underneath there, some in the teeth won't hurt, the white there won't hurt. Put this in position. Now there should be 2 teeth engaged, like that. I'm just revolving the shaft here to make sure it's engaged at the back. That looks good. A hold down bracket at this end I can put in place. We had 1 screw here. There was also a shim washer under here, I think, from memory, and we may or may not need it, so we'll try it without and see how it goes. If it behaves nicely, we don't need it. If it doesn't behave nicely, perhaps we do need it and we'll put it back in place. But it's quite common with cameras that as they age, your tolerances, things wear, the tolerances become, clearances become larger, and where you needed a shim, you no longer need it. Conversely, you may find that you do need a shim where you didn't previously. Get this strap lug bracket in at this end, that'll support the rack at that end, and I want to put the screw in that position, even though I've got to take it out to put the meter back there further down the track. I want to make sure that that strap lug's being held down firmly so that I don't get any false impressions that there's miles of clearance when really there isn't. Okay, so the shutter cocking rack, how will it behave? Press the release lever, hold the lock lever, swing this through an arc. Now you see that sticks out. Something's too tight, it doesn't want to move. What happens if we slacken off this screw and that one? How will that behave? It's still tight. That's not our problem then. Our problem, I think, is here. Let's just retighten that for the moment. What I suspect is, looking at this, is we have insufficient clearance. There's not enough backlash on the teeth here. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's very tight. Okay, so how do we deal with that? I'll just slacken up the strap plugs at this end because I can swing my chrome trim out of the way. The 2 screws here and here, I'll loosen those. Pull the shaft over towards the front of the camera, retighten the screws and see how that behaves. Yeah, that's much nicer. Okay, let's put the strap lug back on. Basically what I've done there is I've just made use of the slop in the system to move the shaft over so that we now have sufficient clearance here. So we got just introduced a little bit of backlash there. which is what it requires if it's going to run smoothly. Let's try that again. That seems okay. Still a bit tight. Let's try loosening that screw now. No, it's still tight. Well, I've got enough backlash there. Now it's not much. I'm having a closer look at that. There's something called a service replacement for that shoulder screw. And the service replacement reduced the amount of backlash that you'd have there. Now I'm looking to see whether I've got a service replacement on there or whether that's an original. That looks like an original. Alright, let's see if we can create some more clearance. Take that trim off so I can see what I'm doing. So basically we haven't got enough play at this point. This is too stiff. Let's just make sure we're moving that over as far as it'll go. Oh, lock lever's not. The release lever wasn't pressing down far enough. That seems okay. Let's put the chrome trim back on and the strap lug. I may need to put a shim under the strap lug. Yeah, it's still tight. Let's try putting a shim under here. I'll loosen that strap lug first, see how that behaves. I'm checking this cocking rack, making sure that it's not bent. That's a possibility. Let's have a look at that. If it's bent, if it's shaped like a banana, it'll be up at each end, and that makes it hard for it to move smoothly. And we'll just have a quick look at that rack. So what I'm interested in is whether it is flat through here. I'm holding that up to the light. That looks pretty good to me. Is it too tight here? I may have insufficient clearance at this point. It feels pretty snug. I did set that with this feeler gauge too, so not sure why that should be misbehaving. Let's check the clearance there. That seems too tight. Let's try that. Give that a go. Some of these things interact with each other to some extent too. These adjustments. So sometimes you might need a bit of toing and froing. Check that screw. It seems smooth. Let's put the strap lug back in place. The action must be smooth. Don't be tempted to wind more tension onto the film advance lever in order to make things return smoother. It should return by itself like that. That's ideal, that's working just nicely. Now, I haven't shimmed anything at all. All I've done is get the clearance here behind that cocking rack as it should have been, and I can only presume that it had moved after I'd put everything back together. I'm not sure why that happened. Doesn't matter, I suppose. It's where it should be now and where it should have been to start off with. I'll get these screws in the strap lug here at this end of the camera. And that action is nice and smooth, and certainly doesn't require any shims. Okay, at this point I think I can fit the front door.